let's talk about the American invasion, 2003. So you've managed to stay out of the army up until the invasion. But then, talk about the military situation kind of leading right up to it in Baghdad, and then what happens to you during the invasion.
So by 2002, kind of like the war drums were so loud you could hear them even in Baghdad, even in the isolation of Baghdad, and and no one wanted a war. And this is another conversation we've had with friends. I don't remember anyone saying, "Yes, it's great. Let's have another war. Let's be bombed again by the Americans." But no one wanted to see Saddam. And again, this whole question, the very simplistic question, Saddam or America, was a very, I think it's a very kind of linear, simplistic paradigm in which we have to choose between a mad dictator or a foreign invasion. Anyhow, no one asked us our opinion. But then as the war is approaching, we Iraqis know very well how to survive a war. So we started, stockpiling. I myself started buying tuna, rice, cooking oil, gasoline for the lamps, and because you know what will happen when the war starts. The first thing you lose is the electricity, the water, and then the war started, and the bombing on the city started, and buildings started, being destroyed. The command of the Air Force was very close to the place where I was living, was bombed. Different targets around the city was bombed. Stupidly, I would cycle throughout the streets of Baghdad with a small camera, a Minolta that a friend had lent me, and take pictures of destroyed buildings, thinking that I want to document the architecture of the city, the destruction of the city. Very stupid. I was arrested once, went back home, waited, and then one day a neighbor knocks at my door and says, "The Americans are here." And I'm kind of trying to trace their movements on a map, listening to the radio. And I say, "Yes, they're 100 kilometers south of Baghdad." "No, no, they're here downstairs." And you go downstairs and you see this. It's like a movie. That day plays in my head like a movie. You see these, you know, American Marines, amphibious armored vehicles, soldiers pointing their guns. It's things you see in the movie, and then it's happening right in front of your door. And uh, and then I followed that kind of Marine convoy. They reached the square where all the journalists were staying, and of course the famous statue that was toppled, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to read your perspectives of the invasion. You write a little bit about how Iraqis, you maybe at the very beginning are thinking, okay, the Americans could change things for the better, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, again, no one asked the Iraqis their opinion, but once Saddam was toppled, there was a kind of a collective sigh of relief that lasted probably a couple of hours because everyone was happy to see the end of Saddam. And I say even in Saddam's hometown, even within the military, everyone was very happy to see the end of Saddam. And of course, there was this kind of perception, oh, this is the greatest nation in the world. Look at their machines, look at their guns, look at their tanks. Of course, everything will be fixed within weeks, and Iraq will turn into maybe Dubai within. And of course, none of that happened. None of that happened for multiple reasons. Uh, people blame the Americans who had no planning for the day after. The kind of the criminal negligence, I would say, of the people who planned the war, who executed the war, and of course they managed to alienate those Iraqis within, I would say, days, weeks. And the third element, which is I now totally believe in, there was no scenario in which a foreign invasion comes to invade a country after bombing it, multiple times. There is such a big gap. Not only there's a gap in language, in perspective, and whatever you want to call it, but there's also so much grief in Iraq and so much grief in the States. And I mean, most of the soldiers I talked to after 2003, it's 9/11 is there, and you try to kind of say, but hold on, we are not 9/11, we're Iraq. We had nothing to do with Al Qaeda, with the jihadis, and all these things. But that was part of, it was the motive. Personally, there in the background, consciously, unconsciously, 9/11 was very present. in anything that happened in Iraq, 2003 and after. But that was a very, very wrong misconception. And of course, again, I say criminal negligence because an American soldier standing in the middle of the street, in the middle of the heat, they don't know what to do. They don't speak the language. No one told them what to do. Sometimes they try to, to clear gridlocks. Sometimes they just drive their tanks in the middle of the street. It was utter chaos. It was utter chaos. And in that chaos, and that moment of chaos, and the lack of security, everything that happened after all the civil wars in Iraq and Syria kind of had the spark from that chaos because suddenly the borders are open. And everyone who has a grievance against the Americans, jihadis, Iranians, you name them, flooded into Iraq because that's the place where you can fight the Americans. Before you had to go bomb a USS Cole in the middle of the ocean to, from their perspective, to fight American soldiers, to kill American soldiers. Now you can just do it in the streets of Baghdad. And the lack of security led to the looting of all the military depots and military camps. You push all the Iraqi army officers who wanted to play a role in the post Saddam whatever regime. They are all alienated, pushed into a corner and condemned collectively as collaborators of the regime. So all these conditions created the mess that happened later. And of course, from an Iranian perspective, why do we wait for the Americans to topple Saddam and then come after us? No, we will make sure that the Americans are defeated in Iraq. So you have all these different elements fighting the Americans on Iraqi soil.